Today's story that has touched hearts around the world, demonstrating the profound impact our decisions have on our lives. Beyond our innate talents, this tale was inspired by the well-known J.K. Rowling, famous for her best-selling books like Harry Potter and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Rowling insightfully stated in an interview that our decisions define us more clearly than our capabilities. Her perspective is particularly meaningful considering her own rise from severe adversity to substantial success and recognition. Let us explore a story that became a worldwide phenomenon a few years back, capturing the attention of millions within days. Back in 2015, a remarkable occurrence took place in a Miami, Florida courtroom, overseen by Judge Mindy Glazer. It wasn't just another day in court. The case involved a man named Arthur Booth, who had been apprehended for theft and subsequently caught following a high-speed pursuit that resulted in a crash. Booth, with a history of prior convictions and prison time, seemed unfazed and prepared to face the upcoming legal proceedings. As Judge Glazer looked through Booth's file ready to begin the hearing, she did something unexpected. Instead of immediately addressing the charges, she paused, gazed at Booth, and asked, "Did you attend Nautilus for middle school?" This sudden question caught everyone off guard, Booth included, who paused to examine the judge's face. As he recognized her, Booth's demeanor transformed significantly. Overcome with emotion, he exclaimed, "Oh my God, this can't be, my God, I'm so embarrassed." What was once a defiant Booth became a remorseful man, tears welling up in his eyes as he faced someone from his past, his own middle school classmate, now presiding as a judge. The courtroom audience, including the prosecution and defense lawyers, watched in amazement as this emotional scene unfolded. Booth, who had entered with a stoic expression, was now visibly distressed, crying and covering his face with his hands. This poignant moment highlighted the starkly different paths life can take based on the choices we make. Here were two individuals, who had once roamed the same school corridors as children, now reunited under circumstances that could scarcely be more contrasting. As we reflect on this story, it serves as a powerful reminder of the lasting consequences of our choices. Reflecting on this narrative, it underscores the profound influence our choices exert on the direction our lives take. It also highlights the spontaneous moments of compassion that can surface even in the most structured environments, reminding us that beneath every function, title, or situation, there is a universal bond that connects us all, stemming from our common origins and the unpredictability of our life's paths. In a touching moment in the courtroom, Arthur was unexpectedly reunited with Judge Glazer, a familiar face from his past. Overwhelmed with emotion, Arthur wept. Moved by a past that stretched back more than 30 years to a juncture where his life had veered off course. During his adolescent years, Arthur was a model of ambition and potential. Not only was he among the top students at the esteemed Nautilus School in Miami in the late 1970s, known for its demanding academic standards, but he had also been a standout student at William Brent Elementary School. His parents were exceedingly proud of him, particularly as he was the oldest of 3 children and had demonstrated an extraordinary enthusiasm for learning. Arthur had taught himself Spanish and consistently achieved high marks, despite the challenges of commuting nearly an hour each way to school by bus. From a modest background, Arthur's dream was to become a neurosurgeon, a goal driven by his intense passion to excel and effect change. Yet, fate had other plans. Judge Mindy Glazer, who remembered Arthur as the brightest and most compassionate student from middle school, was heartbroken to witness the significant disparity between the boy she knew and the man before her. She remembered how Arthur had excelled academically and how she, despite her ambitions to become a veterinarian, had admired him. Their serendipitous encounter in the courtroom was a poignant reminder of times gone by. Arthur had been released from prison just a few months prior, marking a significant departure from his once promising beginnings. His downfall began subtly at the age of 17 when he started gambling. Initially engaging in card games for small sums, his involvement escalated to larger bets and a growing desperation for more money. Falling in with a detrimental crowd, Arthur found himself caught in a cycle of debt, despair, and anxiety. This ultimately led him to experiment with drugs for the first time, spiraling into addiction and continual turmoil. Originally a student with great prospects, Arthur had dramatically changed into someone his childhood friends could barely recognize. In the courtroom, a mix of nostalgia and sadness filled Judge Glazer as she spoke to Arthur, mourning the heartbreaking path his life had taken and the squandered potential. Arthur, burdened by the regrets of his past and the stark reality of his current situation, was unable to contain his emotions, shedding tears over the life he might have had. The stark contrast between their childhood friendships and their current realities was particularly poignant when Judge Mendy, during a court session, questioned Arthur, now standing trial, about his awareness of the severity of his actions and his acceptance of the charges filed against him. Arthur, clearly distressed and repentant, admitted to his offenses, fully recognizing his faults. As the court proceedings unfolded, Arthur was visibly distraught, his gaze consistently lowered. Unable to look up, what began as a heartfelt reunion between old classmates concluded with a harsh return to reality when Judge Mendy set Arthur's bail at $43,000 or an alternative sentence of 1 year in jail. Before adjourning, she spoke sincerely, expressing her hope for Arthur's rehabilitation and urging him to ponder on their past and make amends. "Mr. Booth, I sincerely hope you turn your life around. It pains me to see you in this state. Remember my words and strive for change. Good luck." "Sir, I wish you well and hope you lead a lawful life," she stated. The narrative doesn't end there. Encouraged by Judge Mendy's impactful words, Arthur underwent a significant transformation while incarcerated, serving 10 months for good behavior. He spent his time educating himself in business, having once dreamed of becoming a surgeon. Upon release, he was committed to starting afresh. He sought to personally express his gratitude to Judge Mendy for her inspiring words that deeply influenced him during his time in jail. During their emotional reunion in the courtroom, Arthur promised her he would stay out of prison and leave behind his former destructive habits of gambling and drugs. True to his word, he has kept his promise. Nearly 5 years later, Arthur has risen to the position of a successful manager at a pharmaceutical company. He now leads a comfortable life, free of his previous addictions, with the ability to enjoy global travel and owning a home. His remarkable turnaround was facilitated by voluntary treatment and his unwavering dedication to his new direction. Arthur continues to be thankful to destiny for orchestrating his reunion with Judge Mendy in the courtroom, acknowledging her role in transforming his life. He frequently contemplates the encouragement he received from a longtime friend, which steered him towards making wise decisions. This narrative powerfully demonstrates how our choices and decisions mold our futures and steer our life's journey. What are your thoughts on the influence of personal decisions and life-altering opportunities such as the one experienced by Arthur? Please share your perspectives in the comments below. Next, let's continue to see another similar story. In the hectic environment of a city bus, young Ava observed an old man finding it difficult to remain standing as the bus swayed. She quickly gave up her seat to him, a modest yet praiseworthy gesture of kindness, as the elderly gentleman took the seat. He reached into his coat and extracted an item that immediately silenced the bus. The item he handed Ava was so astonishing that it rendered her fellow passengers mute, their expressions filled with shock. Ava, puzzled by their reactions, noticed that the others seemed to recognize the item. As many eyes were now fixed on her, the atmosphere was charged with murmurs, and some passengers even pointed at her. In contrast, the old man simply gave her a wink and looked away through the window. Feeling pressured, Ava discreetly put the item in her pocket, but this did little to lessen the growing fascination and scrutiny from those around her. A passenger came up to her, inquiring if he could see the item. Growing increasingly uneasy, Ava firmly refused, but the man was insistent. In a frantic effort to escape the tense atmosphere, Ava dashed past the man and jumped off the bus as the doors were closing, making sure no one could follow her, as the bus continued on its route. Ava noticed countless pairs of eyes watching her from the bus windows. Left alone and shocked, she pondered the predicament she had found herself in. She was still far from home and too fearful to wait for another bus, worried that some passengers might get off at the next stop and search for her. Ava had a general sense of her location and the way to her home, so she began walking. Desperate to put some distance between herself and the bus route, she tried to call her mother a few times, but, as usual, She was unreachable during work hours. With her father living in another state post-divorce, she recognized he was not an option for help either. Feeling alone and anxious, Ava realized she had no choice but to courageously make her way home on foot. With only her bus card and a small amount of money, her urgent desire to escape the distressing situation drove her forward. As she walked, Ava fiddled with the mysterious object in her pocket. Reflecting on the series of events that had led to her unexpected adventure, determined, Ava continued walking, hoping to locate her home. She was deeply intrigued by the item an elderly man had given her, which was radiating intense heat in her pocket. Her curiosity was piqued to uncover its exact purpose, though she was apprehensive about examining it in any place where onlookers might spot her. Having experienced unwanted attention previously, she was anxious not to repeat the ordeal. Especially since there was no nearby bus to facilitate a swift escape. With no immediate way out, she felt vulnerable among the strangers around her. After wrestling with her curiosity for about 15 minutes and still far from her neighborhood, Ava couldn't hold back any longer. She quickly scanned her surroundings, then discreetly ducked into a shadowy alley, feeling secure in her solitude. Ava extracted the peculiar item from her pocket for a closer examination. It seemed to be a compact, complex electronic gadget. She was unsure of its function and doubted it held any significant value or rarity. Yet, the old man had stressed the importance of keeping it with her at all costs. When Ava was absorbed in scrutinizing the gadget, a sudden noise startled her. She whirled around to see a towering figure looming in the alley's faint light. She couldn't discern any detailed features, but the size of the person was intimidating. The stranger questioned what a young girl like her was doing in such a place. Ava's heart dropped. This was the exact scenario her mother had always cautioned her about, interacting with strangers. Looking around, Ava realized there was no obvious way to escape. As the large figure drew nearer, she began to beg to be allowed to leave, but her pleas were quickly dismissed. The man insisted she accompany him, assuring her that if she cooperated and did not resist, there would be no harm. Ava's anxiety intensified, but the man soon eased her worries when he took her back to the street and revealed his badge. It turned out he was an off-duty police officer. He had been keeping an eye on Ava after noticing her walking alone. His concern had escalated when she abruptly veered into a dark alley, prompting him to step in to ensure her safety. As she stepped onto the curb, Ava felt a mix of gratitude and worry, unsure if the officer's intentions were genuinely protective. She glanced back briefly, nodding in thanks before hurrying towards her home's safety. In a barely lit alley, Ava felt it was the right moment to begin asking questions. Her openness helped ease her nerves considerably, although she was still unsure about her next actions. The pressing inquiries from the police only heightened her anxiety. Hesitant to disclose the enigmatic device an elderly man had given her, Ava was troubled by the strange reactions it had provoked on the bus earlier. To divert their suspicions, Ava concocted a tale. She explained to the officer that she had mistakenly alighted at the wrong bus stop and decided to walk the rest of the way home. Her body shook from the recent events, but her focus was suddenly captured by a voice calling her name. She turned to find a man in plain clothes, his expression a mixture of worry and curiosity. He introduced himself as an off-duty police officer and offered his help. Cautiously, Ava evaluated the stranger. Despite knowing he was a police officer, she hesitated, uncertain whether it was safe to trust him. After a pause, she silently agreed to accept his offer of a ride home. Relief and anxiety mingled as she entered his car, keeping her eyes on the road ahead, her mind filled with thoughts about the officer's real motives. To lighten the mood, the officer began a conversation about her day, her school, and why she was so far from home. Ava gave guarded, vague responses, very conscious of the device concealed in her pocket, a significant secret she wasn't prepared to share yet. She deliberately omitted mentioning the encounter with the elderly man and the eerie whisper on the bus. The officer occasionally glanced at her, feeling there was more to her story than she was revealing. Ava sensed his probing gaze and gripped the mysterious device even tighter in her pocket. As they neared her neighborhood, the officer's concern grew. Sensing Ava's discomfort and her hesitation to disclose the entire story, he wondered what had so deeply frightened the young girl that she had preferred to walk alone at night. Engulfed in a tumult of thoughts and staring out the window, Ava pondered whether trusting this stranger had been a wise choice. Upon reaching her house, a sense of urgency overwhelmed her. She quickly thanked the officer, opened the door hastily, and was eager to escape to the safety of her home. Ava felt her heart racing as she exited the vehicle, her thoughts consumed by the mysterious gadget and whether her secrets would remain safeguarded. In her haste, distracted by the day's uncertainties, Ava failed to notice the small device tumbling out of her pocket. It landed silently on the car floor, an unremarkable blend of metal and plastic, its importance known solely to her. As she shut the car door and moved away, she was unaware that she had left behind the very item that had been causing her so much anxiety. The officer, readying to depart, noticed the dropped gadget. His eyes sharpened with recognition, and a moment of realization passed over his face. He picked it up and scrutinized it, his mind overwhelmed by the ramifications of what he held. Nevertheless, he opted to keep quiet, contemplating how best to proceed, aware that acknowledging the gadget could further alarm Ava. While Ava continued walking, unaware of the officer's discovery behind her, the officer held the device firmly. He was caught between wanting to call out to her and choosing to keep the information to himself. After a moment's hesitation, he pocketed the device, resolving to conduct his own investigation before making any revelations. Alone in his car, the officer stared at the spot Ava had vacated, besieged by questions. Why had Ava appeared so anxious? What was the purpose of this device? His role as an officer compelled him to seek answers, yet he also felt a need to shield the distressed young woman he had just met. When Ava entered her house, the walls seemed to press in on her. Deprived of the device's physical presence, the burden of her secret felt even more oppressive. She found her mother in the kitchen and, with a shaky voice, began to disclose the events of the day. Her fears and confusion, long repressed, overflowed as she spoke rapidly. Ava's mother listened with increasing concern, her expression growing more worried and perplexed with every detail. She stepped closer, extending her arms in an effort to comfort Ava. The tale, involving the cryptic old man and the mysterious device, unfolded rapidly. The scenario seemed ripped from the pages of a thriller, a situation far too intense for her daughter to ever confront. Concern for Ava's well-being flooded her mother's thoughts. Ava detailed the ordeal, the packed bus, the elderly man's odd behavior, and the murmurs of fellow passengers. She vividly explained the mysterious device, with her mother absorbing every detail. Ava's voice trembled as she recounted the ensuing panic that compelled her to flee the bus and her subsequent meeting with an off-duty officer. With each disclosure, her mother's eyes grew wider, a mix of shock and fear enveloping her face. As the severity of the incident sunk in, Ava's mother realized the urgency of seeking assistance. She proposed that they consult the police for insights into the enigmatic device and to possibly unravel the questions that loomed over them. Initially hesitant, the elderly man, Avon, agreed with a shift in expression from reluctance to determination. They concluded that consulting experts who could navigate such perplexing events was essential. That night, Ava lay in bed, restless, the day's events replaying in her mind relentlessly. Even without the device's presence, her anxiety persisted. Her thoughts a chaotic blend of fear, curiosity, and dark premonitions. Sleep eluded her as the night dragged on, shrouded in shadows and whispers of uncertainty. The next morning, Ava and her mother reached the imposing and majestic police station. The air inside buzzed with the scent of coffee and a vibrant buzz of activity. Clasping her mother's hand, Ava felt a surge of anxiety mixed with a desperate hope for clarity. They approached the reception, ready to share their story again. An officer led them to a small room, where Ava was asked to recall every detail about the old man. She focused hard, visualizing his face, attire, and demeanor. A police sketch artist paid close attention, his pencil rapidly sketching. Ava watched intently, her heart caught in her throat, as the drawing of the old man took shape on the paper. Silently, Ava stared at the sketch, which appeared almost ghostly, reminiscent of that odd day on the bus. She answered the officer's questions in a nearly mechanical manner, her mind overwhelmed with confusion and fear. The reality of being involved in a police investigation seemed surreal and distant from her usual routine. The circumstances became increasingly strange and unnerving. During the questioning, Ava's mother remained at her side, offering unwavering support through the chaos. Her comforting gestures and encouraging nods, coupled with eyes filled with worry and affection, silently reinforced her steadfast backing no matter how odd or challenging the path ahead seemed. As the session wrapped up, the officer leading the investigation assured them of a detailed inquiry with a calm and somewhat comforting demeanor. He detailed forthcoming actions and committed to regular updates. Exiting the police station, Ava and her mother experienced a modest sense of relief, hopeful that measures would be taken. Several days later, the police provided unexpected news. They had successfully identified the elderly man from Ava's drawing. What had been a brief memory for Ava now had a name and an address attached to it. Ava's heart pounded as she heard the officer over the phone. The mysterious man from the bus was no longer a mere silhouette. He had become a real entity within the grasp of justice. The police acted with urgency to detain him, turning what was once elusive into a concrete reality at her home. Ava dealt with a tumultuous mix of shock and disbelief following the arrest. The quiet man who had once handed her a mysterious object, sparking a flurry of fear and curiosity, was now under arrest. This revelation brought a crashing sense of reality as she sat in her room contemplating the ramifications of the arrest. A sense of relief enveloped her, knowing this man was no longer a direct threat. Yet this relief mingled with confusion and an odd sense of guilt. She wondered why she was the recipient of his cryptic gift and what his real intentions might have been. These lingering questions troubled her, causing unease and casting doubt on the man's initial gesture, which had seemed benign but now felt dubious. What had appeared as a simple act of kindness on the bus had spiraled into a complex and possibly malicious affair. Ava rethought that brief interaction, speculating whether there was a concealed motive behind his smile. In the ensuing days, Ava and her mother anxiously awaited further details. Every phone ring brought a surge of anticipation throughout the home, as Ava and her mother braced for the next update. People longed for answers that would make sense of the turmoil and provide resolution to the perplexing enigma. However, with each passing day, the shadows of doubt only seemed to grow longer. In the interrogation room, the elderly gentleman faced the detectives, his face betraying no emotion. The officers delved into his motives, firing sharp inquiries about his interaction with Ava and the enigmatic apparatus. His answers were greeted with doubt, and every statement he made was meticulously analyzed. The room was charged with tension as the detectives relentlessly sought to unearth the reality of his deeds. Despite the intense scrutiny, the elderly man stood by his innocence, his voice firm and his eyes steady. He claimed his actions were merely out of goodwill towards a stranger he wished to thank, a gesture that had been severely misinterpreted and exaggerated. His words depicted a scene of misapprehension. Yet the officers remained unconvinced. Despite the elderly man's assertions, skepticism permeated the atmosphere. The detectives exchanged knowing looks filled with doubt and indecision. His account seemed possible, yet it lacked solid proof. The enigma surrounding the device, along with Ava's evident distress, cast a somber tone over his account. The truth stayed just out of reach. When Ava learned of the elderly man's assertions, she was conflicted. The alarm and bewilderment she felt on the bus that day clashed with the notion that there might have been a simple misunderstanding, had she been too quick to judge. Her thoughts were a tumult of opposing emotions, each vying for dominance. The man's countenance, previously remembered as kind, now shifted in her recollection as the probe progressed. Ava struggled with the intricacies of the case. Her feelings knotted as she endeavored to sift through the web of doubts and fears. She found herself caught in the complexities of a police investigation that stretched her nights into restless vigils. As she lay in bed, her mind wandered through a maze of scenarios, trying to separate truth from deception in the old man's story. The burden of the unknown pressed down on her, making each moment feel exceedingly oppressive. The police conducted a meticulous examination of the old man's background, searching for any hint that might shed light on the present mystery. They examined records, spoke with people he knew, and scrutinized every bit of his history with a metaphorical microscope. Each piece of evidence they uncovered added layers to an already complex puzzle, yet the complete picture remained elusive. The full picture remained elusive. The life of the elderly man resembled a complex mosaic crafted from both mundane and peculiar elements, challenging the detectives to examine every detail in their quest for truth. as the investigation unfolded. Fascinating insights into the enigmatic device began to emerge. This device, previously unknown to law enforcement, featured advanced technology and its purpose remained veiled in mystery. Specialists were consulted, and their findings only intensified the intrigue rather than clarifying it. Initially a mere object of interest, the device now lay at the heart of a tangled array of inquiries. As law enforcement delved deeper into the elderly man's history, more questions surfaced. His existence was a mix of the ordinary and the mysterious, a conundrum that seemed out of place with the seriousness of the situation at hand. There were no obvious signs of malicious intent, yet nothing conclusively confirmed his innocence either. The elderly man continued to be a mystery, his background an unsolved puzzle. Ava felt the burden of the ongoing investigation intensify with each new discovery and unresolved question adding to the load she bore. The uncertainty ate at her. And the elderly man's unclear role in her life became a constant source of worry. What once was the simplicity of her day-to-day existence now felt like a distant recollection, eclipsed by the complexity of the scenario she had inadvertently become entangled in. Bit by bit, the true nature of the device started to reveal itself. The layers of enigma began to unravel, offering glimpses of its intent and capabilities. This was a pivotal moment in the investigation. A juncture that promised answers yet also suggested new intricacies. Ava and her mother awaited these disclosures with anxious anticipation, hopeful yet fearful about what the truths might unveil. Ava grappled with a mounting sense of regret, pondering whether her actions might have inadvertently caused damage. She revisited the events repeatedly, each time scrutinizing her choices. The burden of the ensuing events since that day on the bus weighed down on her, blending with her bewilderment. She speculated whether there was anything she could have done differently, questioning if her involvement had exacerbated the situation. In quieter moments, Ava reevaluated her initial perception of the elderly man, his amiable demeanor on the bus and the gentle manner in which he handed her the device. These recollections now sketched a multifaceted portrait of a man whose true nature was yet to be fully understood, caught in circumstances beyond his control. A man challenges Ava to reconsider everything she once believed. Amid a storm of suspicion and fear, a seemingly benevolent gesture was grossly misinterpreted. Ava struggled to reconcile her memories with the reality that was unfolding before her. Torn, her emotions swirled like a tempestuous ocean of sympathy and suspicion. On one hand, she felt empathy for the elderly gentleman, questioning if he was simply a misunderstood character trapped in an unfortunate string of incidents. On the other hand, she harbored doubts, fueled by the enigmatic characteristics of the device and the man's obscure history. This internal turmoil left her feeling uneasy and conflicted. In these difficult moments, Ava found solace in the comfort of her family. The embrace of her mother and the reassuring voice of her father over the phone served as her anchors, keeping her stable amid the chaos. Although they didn't possess all the answers, their presence provided a sanctuary from the swirling uncertainty. In the care of her family, Ava found a refuge filled with understanding and support. When they prepared for the final outcomes of the investigation, the atmosphere in the house was laden with anticipation. Every phone ring or knock at the door triggered a whirlwind of emotions. They understood that the impending answers could either offer resolution or lead to more complexities. Despite the uncertainty, there was a unified resolve to confront whatever truths lay ahead. The investigation reached a critical juncture when the device was conclusively identified as an advanced tracking device. This discovery sent shockwaves through Ava and her family. The seemingly innocuous item now unveiled its sinister capabilities. The implications were alarming, and Ava felt a chill run down her spine as she contemplated the extent of the privacy invasion. Armed with this new information, the police intensified their interrogation of the elderly man's motives. What had driven him to give such a device to a young woman? Was it an act of malice or a misguided attempt at something more benign? The detectives pored over his statements, searching for inconsistencies and striving to uncover the truth behind his actions. Ava's family wrestled with coming to terms with this revelation. The presence of a tracking device raised grave concerns about their safety and privacy. Conversations throughout the household oscillated between fear, anger, and disbelief. The trust they once placed in the world, and in the kindness of strangers, was profoundly shaken. They clung to each other with more intensity, the once taken for granted feeling of safety now compromised. The complete narrative of the elderly man unveiled a tangled web of motives and deeds. Ava and her relatives absorbed the police's intricate revelations with intense anticipation, the discovered truths, though less menacing than anticipated, still stirred a blend of emotions within them about the elder's conduct. Following these events, the authorities expanded their probe to ensure no stone was left unturned. While still reeling from the initial shock, Ava and her kin slowly began to find comfort in the transparency of the ongoing developments, cautiously mending the trust that had been so sharply interrupted, deciding the appropriate consequences for the senior, whose actions were now seen as ill-advised rather than harmful, presented a complex ethical and legal dilemma. As the legal process progressed, Ava watched distantly, her feelings intricately intertwined. The conclusion of these events would close a significant chapter in her life, yet the impressions it left would forever linger in her mind. In the ensuing quiet, Ava spent many hours contemplating the sequence of events that had unfolded. She faced tough realities about trust and caution in a world more complex than she once realized. The ordeal taught her the essential balance between kindness and caution, emphasizing the need to trust her instincts. These tough lessons, learned under stressful circumstances, had become a crucial part of her personal growth. The ordeal also enhanced Ava's understanding of human complexity. She realized that people are not simply good or bad, but are assemblies of various characteristics and motivations. This insight encouraged a more empathetic and less judgmental view, helping her recognize that everyone has their own story, challenges, and truths that may not be immediately apparent. While Ava and her family began to move beyond the incident, the conversations at their dinner table shifted from discussing the event to sharing their emotional paths and recovery process. They chose to concentrate on the resilience and strength they had discovered in each other rather than the fear and uncertainty that had initially overwhelmed them. The elderly man, facing the legal consequences of his actions, was judged in a manner that carefully balanced his intentions with the outcomes of his deeds. Ava observed the judicial consequences with detached interest, having emotionally disengaged from the proceedings. She recognized that the outcome was a direct result of his decisions, which were now unrelated to her own journey of healing and comprehension. As she progressed, Ava took with her the deep insights that this unforeseen life event had provided. With a refreshed perspective and a deeper appreciation for life's complexities, her spirit remained receptive to new knowledge, and her intellect was honed through these experiences. With confidence, Ava stepped into the next phase of her life, ready to embrace what lay ahead, armed with a refined understanding and a readiness to continue her personal growth. Do you have any insights after watching the above two stories? Feel free to tell us in the comments sections below. That's all about our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe our channel. See you next time.